Hello, what we are going to be doing today is a Swiss roll. This is a fatless sponge, so there's no fat in this at all. We are going to be using eggs and sugar and then sifting in some flour. First of all though, I am going to just prepare my baking tray. So I've got here just some baking parchment and I've got a Swiss roll tin. These are the best tins to use. Sort of ones we've got at school are maybe slightly deeper, and those would be possibly better to use. So if you've got a slightly deeper one, that'd be great, but this is all I've got at home. What I'm going to do first is just mark out on my greaseproof paper or my baking paper just the corners of each of on the paper, and this is just to mark out where the corners are. The reason that we're doing this is so that we get a perfect corner. If you put the greaseproof paper down and try and get a perfect corner, you'll notice that it really wrinkles in the corners, and we don't want that. We want this to have nice edges. So what you can do, putting your baking tray on the top and then just mark each of the corners. Just doing it roughly. And then hopefully you can see that I've got 4 marks now where those corners are. What I'm then going to do is just cut in a diagonal line to the corner. Again, just do it very roughly, don't need to worry too much. And that should then mean that when we put this then down, we then end up with much tighter corners in there, and you can see those folds going in. Okay. Now, to make sure that this sticks very slightly, all I'm going to do is just put 4 little dots of butter. So I'm just using the margarine, and that will then just keep the paper from sticking, or sorry, keep the paper sticking to the tin. If it's hot like it is at the moment, please make sure that you are putting things back into the fridges once you're finished with them. For the filling, you'll notice that I haven't got my double cream out yet, just because of the heat. I don't want it going off too quickly. Now, the other thing that you just need to make sure you do, obviously you've got your pencil marks. Do make sure that you're putting those pencil marks on the bottom, just because then you're not putting pencil into your bake. And there you go. So to stop these from sort of curling over slightly, you could put a little bit of margarine just in the middle and just stick it from there, but actually I'm going to leave it as it is at the moment. If it then curls into your mixture, which I think mine might, so I might just put a little bit more butter just in there, but I might just. There we go. And that should then just keep it nice and neat. And that's it for the moment. That is your baking tray then lined. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to use, get my eggs all cracked. So we're using the whole egg at this point, and then I'm going to whisk the egg and the sugar together until it's really, really thick and fluffy. My eggs are at room temperature. If you store your eggs in the fridge, which a lot of people do, please make sure that you are using them at room temperature. So there's a little bit of a question there for you. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we need to be using eggs at room temperature for baking rather than at fridge temperature? So I'm just going to crack my eggs in. So I've got 4 eggs. I've then got 100 grams of caster sugar. And then I've already weighed out as well my 100 grams of flour. Now on this occasion I've actually used self-raising flour, but you can use plain flour if that's all that you've got in the house at the moment. So you can do this by hand, but it takes a very long time. So I do suggest that you use some of the electric whisks, or you could use a food processor, but or a Kenwood if you've got one of those. But the electric whisks are probably the best thing to do. So I'm just going to whisk those up very gently to start with. So you can start to see already that bubbles are beginning to appear, and that's because we're really putting air into it, into the mixture through the whisking process, and that's called aeration. So we're really starting to mix everything together. So I'm just going to add my sugar. I don't need to do it a little bit at a time, I can just add it all at once. And as I said, I want to get this really thick and fluffy. If you don't do this enough, your mixture is then, and your bake is not going to be working later on. Please make sure that you don't get scared of how long that you're doing this for. I've been doing that now for 5 minutes and it's still not quite there. So what it should do is you'll lift it up and it should then hold the shape. So just continue to do that. If it's not quite there, keep going. So the best way of doing this, if you just lift up and you drag a bit of your mixture across the top, it should then just hold. Now, as I've said in the recipe, you do need to be making sure that you don't bang the sides, because if you bang the sides, that's where you're going to lose a lot of that lovely air that you've just spent 10 minutes whisking in. What tends to happen at school is that students then get a little bit scared about how long they've been whisking for, and you then end up with the wrong kind of mixture. So as I've said already, this is a fatless sponge, so there is no fat in this at all. So the only way that it is then getting the rise and the sponge-like consistency is through this bit, through the egg and the sugar. So do make sure that you get that aeration through it as quickly as possible. So I've got my sieve, so all I'm going to do is just sieve through my flour. So as the flour is falling through the sieve and into the mixture, it's going to be falling through the air and trapping yet more air, so it's going to continue to add. So this next bit is the folding that you're going to do. It is best to use a metal spoon at this point. If you don't have a metal spoon, just a tablespoon that you've got in your cutlery drawer, that will do. A dessert spoon, whatever it is, but these are the best ones to use. If you do have a metal spoon like this. Again, it can be used, it's slightly quicker to do, but either or is fantastic. Okay, so all you're then going to be doing is a figure of 8. And as you're drawing that figure of 8, you're going to turn the bowl. So that's the basic one. So if you are struggling, then that is the basic one to do. It's just that continuous figure of 8 all the way through. If you're wanting to do a slightly more advanced one, it's more of a folding technique. So you go round the bowl, drag over the top and then cut through. Make more sense when I'm demoing. So the first one is that figure of 8. Okay, and again you're doing this really gently. Remember all that lovely air that you've whisked into and sieved your flour through and everything. That is all wanting to stay there, all that air. Okay, just make sure that you're really scraping the bowl. So what we're then going to do is the more advanced one, which is a fold and then cut through. Fold, cut through. And again, doing this really gently, making sure that you're getting right underneath. So a question for you here, obviously we know that this is a fatless sponge. So what's the function of all the ingredients? So we've got our flour, the eggs and the sugar. What's the function of all the ingredients? Eggs do have a number of different functions for lots and lots of different things. So it'd be worth looking up those as well. So what are all the different functions of eggs that we can use? Just checking underneath, making sure that I've really mixed through. I don't want any lumps of flour when I turn it out. So you can see it's slightly deflated since I did that first mix. But there you have it. Remember, don't bang the side of your dish, otherwise you're going to get rid of all that lovely air. And all I'm now going to do is just pour it into my baking tray. Just making sure that you do it nice and evenly. So I've just used a spatula just to get rid of a lot of that mixture, making sure I'm not wasting any of it. Okay, and then very carefully all I'm going to do is just make sure that I'm getting it right up to the corners. Now this is a sponge mixture that doesn't take very long to cook. So this only needs to go into the oven for 8 to 10 minutes. So you do need to keep an eye on it as you're doing that. So pop that into the oven. So the oven is on at 180 degrees. Hopefully you've preheated your oven. That's really important that you've preheated it. And then it is only going in there for 8 to 10 minutes. My advice to you is to look at it after 8 minutes, and it may need then a little bit longer. Do make sure that you set a timer for this recipe. It's really important, because otherwise you might lose track of time. So I have just set a timer for that as well. What I'm now going to do is just prepare so that I'm ready for afterwards. So I've got another piece of baking paper, and all I'm going to do is, with a tablespoon, is just lightly spread out some sugar, about 2 tablespoons. Just wanting that nice and even. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to roll it in this. Now with Swiss rolls you can do different patterns and all sorts of different things, so please have a go at doing those different patterns, so you can colour some of your dough, sorry, not your dough, your mixture. You can colour some of that mixture and then make patterns on it. So do have a look at that, because it's a really good way of upskilling some of your work and showcasing some of the skills that you've learned over the last few years. So that's ready, that can just be moved to one side. So at this stage I'm just going to get my cream ready. I'm only wanting 100 grams, but that comes in 2 millimeters, so I just want 100 millimeters. Okay, and just pour that in. And then all I'm going to do is whisk that then up. So again, I'm just going to be using the electric whisk, much easier. Obviously, if you have got just a hand whisk, you can just use that, it's not a problem. It just takes slightly longer to do all of these steps. Do be careful, you don't want to over-whip your cream. And due to the heat, it's not taking very long at all to do that. So just be really careful. If you do like cream, do maybe a little bit more of that, okay? Also just got my raspberry jam that I'm going to use for the filling as well. I'm just going to weigh that out as I've got the time. I'm going to measure this straight into my saucepan, because it just then makes it much easier and it saves on some of the washing up. So again, I just want 100 grams of this. This doesn't need to be so accurately done, it can be done more to the eye, and depending on your family's preference really. So again, with the jam and the cream, that's more down to your family, so I may do a little bit more later on. And all I'm then going to do is just heat that up. The heating of your jam just means that you then end up with it a bit easier to work with, rather than trying to spread really thick jam onto your dough. do remember with this that it doesn't need very long. Don't leave that unattended, because if you burn your jam, it is going to be very, very difficult to try and clean that saucepan. So I've just had a look at mine, I've just touched the top, and actually it just needs 1 more minute longer. What it should do is that as you're touching it, it should be slightly springy to the touch. It's going to be golden brown and it's going to be firm. So as you push it down, it's going to spring back rather than just sort of stay sunk down. So do make sure that you've done that little test, just really, really quickly, and then it just goes back in for another minute or 2. So there you have it, you've got the lovely golden colour, and as I said, if you just touch the top, you can see that it slightly sort of springs back. Now, you need to be doing this really, really quickly and carefully. Whoops. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the Swiss roll out straight onto this. So what I want to do, with my oven gloves, because remember this baking tray is going to be hot, I'm going to tuck in the paper into each end, and all I've done is I've put my palms onto the bottom of the baking tray. Okay, so again, please do this with oven gloves. You need to do this with oven gloves because it has just come out of the oven. And all I'm going to do is quickly and confidently as possible is turn it straight out onto my baking paper. So you may find that some of the paper's got stuck a little bit underneath, but you can just gently pull that out. Again, be very careful at this point because it is going to be really hot. And we don't want to rip our Swiss roll too early. So all we're going to do now is just very carefully lift up the paper. Remember, I didn't grease the paper or anything. All it is baking paper. I haven't added any fat into this. It is all just what's there. So we need to just very carefully just peel back the baking paper. And what you're then going to do is roll it whilst it's still hot. You can actually see some of the flour's not quite mixed in there. There we go. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to roll this whilst it's still warm. So I'm just going to actually start from, no, I'm going to start from this end. So like we've done with sushi, we're going to roll it all together in the paper. Now you do this whilst it's hot because it's easier to roll whilst it's hot. So just very lightly pressing down. I'm not cutting all the way through, I'm just pressing very lightly, about 1 centimetre in. And that's just going to help me do that roll. Now we're going to roll the paper inside. Now we're doing that so that it is then easy to unroll it later. And that can just be left to cool. If you've got a cooling rack, fantastic. If you don't worry. And leaving it to cool whilst it's still warm. We're not going to put the jam and the cream onto our Swiss roll yet. It's still far too hot. And if you put the cream on too quickly, it then becomes liquid again, so it's very difficult. So during this time, whilst this is cooling, so that will take probably about half an hour to properly cool down, especially in this heat. What you could do is put it into the fridge, but that is going to lift up the temperature of your fridge, which obviously can then cause other problems. So whilst that is cooling down, I'm just going to do a tidy up. So all I've done is just unrolled my Swiss roll very slightly, just to try and help cool it down, because there was a lot of heat in at the middle. You can see I've got a couple of cracks beginning to appear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my slightly warmed jam into the middle, and then I'm just going to use a knife just to spread that around. So the reason I put the jam down first is just so that some of those lovely juices can then get absorbed into the sponge as well. So make sure that you're getting right up to the edges. Okay, then just going to get my my cream. Just going to pop that on top. And then again, I'm just going to use the back of my spoon this time and just try and spread it as best you can. You may find at this point that some of the jam does come through a little bit. That's fine. If at this point you discover that actually you haven't got enough cream, do just whip up some more. As I said, every family is different. I've just used the recipe that we use at school, which doesn't give as much jam and cream as much as the students would often like. So again, just making sure that it's nice and even. I haven't gone so far to the edges this time, and the reason behind that is just because when I roll it, you may find that you end up with some of the cream coming out at the end. So all I'm then going to do is, like we did before, rolling it up, but obviously this time I want to make sure that the paper is not on the inside, so I'm very much going to do it like I did for sushi, if you made that in year 8. So just very carefully rolling it over, and as I roll it over, just tucking in and then just continuing to roll. Just doing this very gently because you don't want to disrupt too much of the jam and cream on the inside. So all I'm then going to do is just very carefully lift up and put onto a plate. And what you can then do is decorate your sponge. Obviously that doesn't look particularly appealing at the moment. So all I'm then going to do just with a sieve, sprinkle over the top. Hopefully that starts to come through. I think it's struggling because I've just washed this. Because I've just washed this, it's becoming a little bit dicky, so all I'm going to do is just sprinkle over the top instead, just for quick and ease. Okay, and there you have it. You have got your Swiss roll filled with, I've done a raspberry jam and whipped cream. You could use strawberry jam or any other kind of jam that you wish. Enjoy!